nations across the world are experiencing China's increased engagement in their economies and societies, most notably through the far-reaching Belt and Road Initiative. South Asia is a dynamic region in which the Chinese presence has rapidly expanded, offering attractive opportunities even as it faces serious challenges.
To our Democracy Forum debate on a critical issue about China's expansion and its focus on South Asia. Is it investment, or is it exploitation? Or is it a mix of what over the millennia rising powers do to stretch influence way beyond their borders? What is South Asia's view? China-reliant Pakistan, China big power rival India, China indebted Sri Lanka, and so on. And is Foreign Minister Jin Gang right when this morning he described China as a force for global stability and prosperity, inspiring modernization around the world, particularly in the global south? He said China's achievements bust the myth that modernization is westernization. A big thought for South Asia, which over its decades since decolonization has struggled with the concept of Western democracy. To untangle all this, we have a fantastic Democracy Forum panel: Frederick Greer, Pervez Hoodboy, Christine Fair, and Christopher Clary. Democracy Forum Chair Barry Gardner, MP, is following our debate and is a veteran of Asian issues, and he will give his assessment at the end. And as always, to give us the canvas and background to our discussion, we go to the President of the Democracy Forum, Lord Charles Bruce. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar, which will focus on China's role as a primary source of development finance to countries in South Asia. Previous webinars have looked at the quantum and impact of China's model of international development, while also exposing evidence of foreign policy collusion. Today, we've asked our panel to consider if China is following a broadly positive program of investment in public infrastructure to spread the benefits of economic growth, or conversely, if it is pursuing a process which may amount to colonialism by default. I'm very grateful to the team at TDF for arranging this event and for securing the participation of such an eminent group of panelists. I thank them all for agreeing to take part, and I thank Humphrey Hawksley for taking the role of moderator. In an article published last week, the Economist magazine reviewed the steady accumulation of Chinese foreign direct investment, concluding that the world now owes China's 8 largest state-owned banks at least $1.6 trillion, which is equivalent to 2% of global GDP. Further evidence published by Aid Data, a research center based in Virginia, reveals that over the last 5 years, China's commitment to international development finance has been hovering at around $85 billion per annum, outspending the United States and other large providers by a factor of 2 to 1. There are now at least 40 low and middle income countries whose exposure to Chinese state-owned lenders is worth at least 10% of their GDP. Moreover, many of these countries are actually underreporting the scale of the debt repayment obligations by an amount equivalent to an additional 5.8% of GDP. Altogether, these underreported debts are worth approximately $385 billion, concludes Aid Data. In trying to determine if this program may be best described as investment or exploitation, it's worth bearing in mind that China is currently pursuing a ratio of loans to grants in the order of 31 to 1, priced at relatively high interest rates. But unsurprisingly, perhaps, around 36% of all loan programs started under the Belt and Road Initiative since 2013 have encountered a relatively high level of implementation problems. Invariably, these are characterized by corruption scandals, labor violation, environmental hazards, and public protest. Indeed, some researchers have revealed that Chinese lenders have actually, I quote, scaled up the provision of foreign currency denominated loans to resource-rich countries that suffer from high levels of corruption. Why? Because these loans are collateralized against future commodity export receipts to minimize repayment and fiduciary risk, and in the interest of securing energy and natural resources lacking in sufficient quantities at home and maximizing investment returns on surplus dollars and euros. The relationship between Bangladesh and China is a case in point. In 2015, the Chinese ambassador Ma Minqiang announced the creation of 2 special enterprise zones at a cost of $4.5 billion. The following year, a state visit to Dhaka by President Xi Jinping resulted in 27 loan agreements totaling $24 billion, comprising an extensive shopping list of infrastructure projects. China is also a major arms supplier to Bangladesh, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, accounting for 70% of Bangladeshi arms purchases and 20% of total arms exported by China between 2016 and 2020. But it's not entirely clear what diplomatic leverage China expects to exert from this relationship. In May 2021, at a meeting of the Bangladesh Diplomatic Correspondents Association, the Chinese ambassador Li Jiming used the occasion to announce a gift of 500,000 doses of coronavirus vaccines. However, he let his mask slip somewhat by warning his hosts that their country's relationship would suffer, I quote, substantial damage if Bangladesh joined the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, the informal alliance linking the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. The Bangladesh Foreign Minister, A.K. Abdul Momen, was quick to respond, telling reporters, I quote, "We are an independent and sovereign state. We decide our own foreign policy." And reporting in November last year on another indebted South Asian economy, Reuters revealed that Sri Lanka's accumulated loan obligations to China have reached 20% of its total public external debt, which is estimated to be in the region of $40 billion, with an annual interest payment bill equivalent to 7% of GDP. As we featured in an earlier webinar, Sri Lanka defaulted on its international debt in April last year, the first country in the Asian Pacific region to do so since Pakistan in 1999. But China has been slow to cooperate with other lenders to provide refinancing assurances in order to finalize an IMF assistance program. This was claimed by the Financial Times last week. This intransigence risks undermining the preferred creditor status of the World Bank and the IMF, which is likely to reduce their capacity to provide loans in future to poorer countries at lower rates of interest. At Chatham House, the senior research fellow, Yu Ji, maintains that Beijing will always pursue the best outcome for itself over collective action. I quote, "That has always been the way and it will never change," he said. And nowhere is this more evident than Pakistan, where total public debt currently stands at $270 billion, around 80% of GDP. Pakistan's biggest bilateral creditor, China, holds around $30 billion of its total debt, but shows a similar reluctance to cooperate with refinancing, as it has demonstrated with Sri Lanka. Pakistan is additionally hobbled by the contractual obligations it has accumulated under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, particularly the capacity payments demanded by Chinese independent power producers, the IPPs, which are owed over $9 billion. Yusuf Nazar, an emerging market specialist, asks pointedly, I quote, "Pakistan is squeezed between IMF demands and Chinese interests. Rescheduling debts will provide some relief, but who will bite the bullet first? Or as The Economist puts it, China's money goes to 2 kinds of borrowers. Those with a good chance of repaying, either because projects are likely to turn a profit or governments are sufficiently rich, or those for which any lost money represents a price worth paying for diplomatic advantage. In the case of South Asia, it looks as if China's international development criteria will always favor the second category of borrower. Well, welcome to the webinar, and I hope you enjoy listening to the proceedings. Please put any questions or points to the chair.